We start this week off in Iran, where price hikes and new restrictions on fuel have sparked massive protests across the country. Now, this comes at a time of increased tensions and sanctions between the United States and Iran. RT's Sayeh Tavangar joins us with our top story.
Scottie, at least 12 people have been killed in Iran since protests against fuel prices rises erupted 3 days ago, although some reports suggest the number of dead is even far higher. Now, it appears that the government's announcement of fuel price hikes, which has been between 50 and 300%, depending on where you live in Iran, be the straw that broke the camel's back. So now a large number of protesters are taking to the streets in urban centers across the country. Now, videos posted online show motorists in the capital, Tehran, stopping traffic on the highway and chanting for the police to support them. Now, another clip shows what appears to be a roadblock against the Tehran-Karaj motorway hit by the season's first heavy snowfall. Now, other videos spreading online show clashes between security forces and protesters and banks burning in several cities. Now, some pictures appear to show police stations aflame in the southern city of Shiraz. The government announced that the protests have been calmer today now, despite some minor issues, but that doesn't seem to be the case based on all the videos we're seeing coming from Iran. Now, meanwhile, the powerful Revolutionary Guard demanded an end to the unrest, but protests in Iran have been long time coming. Popular discontent over the country's leadership has brewed for years as economic conditions continue to worsen. So at the moment, these protesters are putting renewed pressure on Iran's government as it struggles to overcome the U.S. sanctions, strangling the country after President Trump unilaterally withdrew America from Tehran's nuclear deal with world powers. In Washington, Sayeh Tavangar, RT.
Thank you, Sayeh. And for more, we turn to reporter and author Dan Lazare. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan. Okay, so I'm going to try to cut through because, unfortunately, we're not getting much information out of Iran right now about what is true and what is not. So I just have to start off with how this all began over the weekend. Do you think this is just about raising gas prices?
No, of course not. It's about politics. It's about the quality of the leadership in Iran, the structure of the state, and broader currents in the Middle East. There seems to be a general revolt against, from Lebanon, Iraq, and now Iran, against this mixing of religion and politics. In Lebanon, they're revolting against the system of confessional politics in which seats are awarded to every major religious faction in the government. In Iraq, they're revolting against heavy-handed Iranian influence, but also mass corruption and government ineffectuality. And in Iran, they're revolting against what seems to be the theocratic dictatorship. That seems to be a major target of the protests. So a big structural shift seems to be underway in the Middle East.
Well, it's interesting because you do bring up the fact that, and these are the two worst things you want to argue about at your Thanksgiving dinner or in the Middle East, politics and religion, and it's coming together in this case. And you mentioned this shift. Has this been kind of a long time coming, and is there going to be anything besides this kind of battle that will be able to bring peace to this area?
Well, I mean, the Sunni Shiite conflict has raged for a decade now, and it's been brutal and destructive. It's torn countries apart. Gave rise to movements like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So it's been hugely destructive. But it seems as if there's now a revolt against that kind of religionization of politics. In Lebanon, people seem to want an end to the entire religious confessional system. In Iraq, they're in revolt against major, huge amounts of corruption and inefficiency and heavy-handed Iranian interference. And in Iran, they seem to be targeting the Islamic State itself. I mean, Iran is under intense pressure from the United States and Israel. The U.S. has it under a punishing economic embargo. But the trouble is that people don't feel that their views are being listened to. Because Iran has essentially an authoritarian religious structure which greatly limits the democratic input by the masses below.
Well, it's interesting, Dan, you bring this up, and the fact that it's not necessarily the factions within the religion, but more importantly, it's people just wanting to get rid of the religion, not get rid of it, but get rid of the idea and its involvement in politics in any place. You know, but one thing that I find to be very frustrating, we're not getting much information because the Iranian government shut down the internet in what is now the largest shutdown ever in history. 40 hours later, connectivity to the outside world remains just at 5% of ordinary levels. How is this dangerous for both the people within the country as well as those that might be wanting to try to help and bring peace to the region?
Well, it's dangerous because I mean people have no way of communicating, no way of knowing what's up, no way of making their protests known. So therefore, the protests tend to intensify and grow all the more vehement, all the more unfocused, and therefore all the more dangerous. But you know, I'd also point out that these protests are not only happening in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon, but Israel is also in acute crisis due to the political stalemate, which is in part, in great measure, due to a heavy-handed religious influence. What? So across the entire region, amongst Shiites, Sunnis, and Jews, there seems to be a growing revolt or a growing breakdown over this question of religious interference in the political sphere.
Well, real quick before I let you go, isn't this sort of what President Trump was hoping for all along when he's put these economic sanctions in place? He was hoping that the people would actually revolt against the government. So is he kind of getting his wishes? And in this case, just like in 1953, are economic sanctions doing the job that they were intended to do?
All I can say is be careful of what you wish for, because it's a two-edged sword. I mean, Israel's in big trouble, and Israel's a major U.S. ally, obviously, in the region. Saudi Arabia is a country in deep crisis. So the entire region is increasingly unstable, and therefore increasingly volatile. And that volatility could swing in a number of different directions. It could easily swing against the U.S. Rather than against Iran. So things are really uncertain. They're up in the air. And yes, Trump is probably having a momentary sense of satisfaction, but it may not last very long.
Well, and that's the thing. Like you said, it's like a powder keg in the Middle East, but it always has been a very tumultuous time. And so it's going to be interesting to see going forward if there is some way to actually bring some brokerage of peace truly to the Middle East. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us.
Thank you.
It's hard to clear through the debris and get right down to the nitty-gritty that is real news. New details are coming to light in the case of Jeffrey Epstein as more
spread between the 2-year Treasury yield and the 10-year Treasury yield.
Several hundred students are staging a sit-in.
The Amazon rainforest, and the blame game is underway. It's time for RT America. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button.